So I've given a couple thoughts on the news that DC's dropping Diamond, and basically delivered kind of the news, the information about it. And what I want to do now is kind of almost go into the other side. I'm going to put my head in a position of somebody who's upset at this move that DC is actually screwing comic shops. I'm going to try and look at some of those arguments, which ones are real, which ones are not, and sort through kind of the ins and outs of the situation. Hey, everybody, this is Perch. I like to look at all sides. Even when I think I know my mind, I know what I think about a topic, I like to still consider the alternatives because sometimes you think about things that you hadn't thought of. You come up with things that need solved. That if you were just all in on something or all hating something, you would not necessarily take the actions to actually make these things work. So yesterday, as we all know now in the industry, DC Comics basically announced they were terminating their Diamond relationship quickly, and that they were going to work through their new distributors, work through UCB UCS. I'm never going to remember that in my head. UCS and Lunar. I don't know why I've got now an account with you, but whatever. At any rate. Why should me mispronouncing things change at all for anything? That's really the story here. Anyway, what's the downside to this? What is a lot of people reacted. So first off, to put it in some context, Newsarama, Bleeding Cool, others ran lots of Facebook comments from retailers who are outraged. I'd say outraged at this information, who are absolutely furious. We covered some of that yesterday, so I'm not going to go into it again. But I would draw the attention to one thing. You saw a couple big names, people who arguably probably had large discounts, large incentive deals, making negative comments. And you had, I think the Newsarama article had 12. The Bleeding Cool had 9, I think. They change in the update. But you're talking about 1,000 retailers, 1,000 different stores, and we're hearing from less than 20 of them. Now, if you go on Facebook, you'll get more than that. I'm not saying it's a tiny, tiny percentage, but do you remember when a few years ago we heard about the massive uproar and outrage from people when they made Sam Wilson Captain America and he was black and it showed that everyone was racist, and then you actually went to Twitter and you could count the people in the hashtag and it's like, oh, wait a minute, it's not that many people actually. It's a handful of loudmouths, or it's one guy posting 80 times, or it's some guy doing a video, 5 dozen times about the same stupid, topic. I think that there's a case here where we're hearing from very loud people, but we aren't hearing from the majority of the industry or anywhere close to it. So just put that in perspective here. Most retailers have kind of one idea in their head. Make money, stay in business. And so weighing in on this, you stuck a knife in the back of Steve Jeppy kind of stuff is that's not something most people focus on. But let's think about the ways this is bad. So I think I've written about here, there's a handful of bad things about this announcement. Okay, so number one, there is not a clear path for international shipping. This has come up, I was on a show earlier, this has come up a few times. It is true, international shipping for UCS Lunar is higher and cost prohibitively higher. And so that has to be solved. Now, from what we hear, that's being quote unquote worked on, and there will be options soon. But it is a problem today. It is going to dent and hurt shops today who are in these other markets who now have to pay significantly more for shipping. And it kind of ties to problem number 2. And to me, this is the big one. We'll talk about this for a little bit. It's that the timing and the planning of these announcements, I think, was poor. Now, granted. The pandemic came fast. Shops were shut down, within weeks, and people scrambled. So I think that it's you have to give some accommodation to everyone involved that the news wasn't going to come as quickly, smoothly, and cleanly. And it is a feat that deserves to be applauded. That during the midst of all these shutdowns and people were working from home and kind of a new normal, a lot of stuff being patched together, that these 2 new distributors were put in place, which also tells you that some of this planning occurred prior to the pandemic. We'll get to that in a minute too. And so I think the messaging has been largely poor. There's had to be a number of clarifications. There's almost had to be retailers had to reach out to each other to kind of figure out what's going on. And even though the sign up for the accounts was easy, the pointing people to what's happening and this weird Mississippi line rule, and all this was further compounded with misinformation from places like Bleeding Cool that published several articles that were wrong and I think further confused and misled people. But this is an area where I think DC and ultimately Midtown and Discount Comic Book Service needed to do a little bit better job of communicating. And now that we've had a couple months go by, the system is working, the operations are going, I would hope that over the next 30 days there becomes a much better announcement. Now, what's interesting is this announcement that the relationship was going to be terminated. This is just speculation on my part, but I suspect that DC sent the letter and there was kind of at least they were hoping for an agreement that, nothing would be said. And, there was some threats made of, I'm going to go public with this, or the news is going to leak out. I think that probably, just knowing how DC works and other people within the company, there was a desire to probably do more in terms of preparing for how this message was going to roll out. But, for one thing or another, I think they were afraid that that information was going to get leaked. Some of the people involved do have, close relationships with, the news sites. And so some of the messaging was rushed. But I think in terms of a comic shop, especially dealing with the pandemic and other things, I think there needed to be a better handling of how the information came through. And I think a lot of pain and confusion and anger, frankly, could have been avoided. And that's on DC, and that's on the new distributors who should have done a better job there. The argument about, is the information going to be less secure? Does this ultimately benefit a Midtown or a Discount Comic Book Service? And the answer is yes, it probably will, but you'd have to question if that was going to happen anyway. So one of the things people are pointing out is that UCS is going to be distributing some of their backstock, Midtown's backstock of Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse, and this provides another easy way for them to get customers. And is that fair, that retailers are now buying from kind of, in effect, a retailer? This seems like kind of outrage news, and it became a big headline article, and people are like, oh, see, this is them kind of, manipulating the system for their own benefit. But the problem is a lot of comic shops, retailers were already ordering from UCS. They were already, or for Midtown, I should say, they're already doing this. So this isn't new. It's being positioned like it's new, and maybe it's new because now they're distributing some of the comics. But I think this is where a lot of people should sit down, take a breath, and really understand the threat, because there are some risks here. Certainly, there's some risks that these companies, because they are a retailer and a distributor both, there's I think a higher percentage of chance that some complacency happens to benefit their own business, that not necessarily something illegal goes on where they're actually shorting orders or deliberately manipulating things in their favor. That would cause big problems and potential shutdowns. But that the business, it's nice to have checks and balances in a supply chain. You have a publisher, you have a distributor, you have a retailer. And it's better when those entities have some independence from each other. And that is an advantage to Diamond. The problem is Diamond was also a monopoly. It was the only game in town. So that created its own weirdness. And so I think we've potentially improved the situation by having some additional options. If there was only a UCS or only Lunar, then I would argue things are not necessarily very good. But the fact that there's two and they have to compete with each other, UCS and Lunar now with DC's books, that is a positive. And I think that's a step in the right direction. But still, I do have some ongoing questions about the supply chain and its independence and what will happen there. I think that's fair. I think the other piece is just, and this is an interesting one. So the retailers are used to a certain path of communication. And in many cases, they worked very hard. They bought a lot of drinks. They established this network. And now the world has shifted under people's feet and a new network has to be established. And so for a lot of comic retailers who were getting their information a certain way or used to calling up a certain person, or they had their rep and everything else, this means they have to now invest some work into getting this going. And so because I have a foot in both doors, both in the comic books door and in tech and some other businesses, I'm used to the world shifting. And what was a power player 1 year, 5 years from now, might not be. In technology, Motorola was running smartphones for a long time. They were the ones to beat. And then Samsung was kind of trying to become an incumbent. LG was there. Then Apple came onto the scene. Suddenly, Google is doing things with Android, but they're an OEM through other, or they're basically OEMing with other companies with Samsung and LG for Android devices. Microsoft tried to poke their head up and went nowhere. So I mean, there's always been shifting in the businesses I've been used to. So the fact that it's shifting in comics, I look at it and I say, well, this is normal. But for a lot of retailers, this isn't normal. And that's a negative. That's something that they're going to have to wrap their heads around. And many may not be equipped to really do that effectively. I think that's something to watch. But in general, I mean, there are definitely some things to watch out for. And I think what we need right now, this is why I often call for stronger news, is we need for there to be, honest commentary, insights, not clowning on people, not channels that are making things up. Also, we don't need the screaming, hyperbolic, this is the worst thing in the world, all comics are going to die. That's bad too. We need balance. We need for companies to look at this thing and say, all right, what is the real impact? What do I need to shift and adjust? And how do I get reliable news and information? And this is where I guess I'll end with this. I think DC has a responsibility to improve the information that they're putting out and make it more reliable and make their streamlined communication smart. And this is where they need to reach out to somebody like just who's good at it. And no, I'm not pushing for the job. I'm just saying they need to reach out to somebody who's good at it. And this is somebody who's probably not in the industry. This is kind of my biggest criticism of many of the publishers and DC is despite all these things, they often lean back and rely on the same unreliable sources of information that got people in these problems. DC needs to either utilize the Time Warner or ultimately the AT&T empire to find consistent, straightforward, honest communication and not get involved in, is the firm you're using or the person you're using, do they know comics? Did at one point they smoke weed or vote for Trump or any of that? You just find somebody who can communicate effectively in a clear way and is honest, hold them to it, and then get this communication channel better. Because right now it is not good. A lot of these changes that are being made, I think, are positive, but that's being hidden a little bit by the fact that there's not enough good information out there. My perspective, anyway. So it's interesting to see a dust settle. Next week, I think we're going to see a lot more. I definitely, before June is out, I think we will see some at least plan for a plan for international shipping. I think we're going to see some other publishers jump on and join this mix now. I think we're going to have to wait. Diamond's got to get past the anger of the breakup and actually get to what's going to fundamentally change about your business. I didn't mention it here because it's a facetious one. Is that people are saying, well, my prices are going up, and that's true. I covered it on this other show. It's true from a standpoint of some of the shipping costs are more expensive, but it's negligible, and some of the discounts I've been getting from Diamond do not exist anymore because my comic order is now split. But even there, again, you look at it and you go, Marvel discounts were applied to Marvel discounts. So if that's the other big player, I'm not sure that world changed at all. And this is incumbent on Diamond. If they were offering incentive programs for an all-in order, which they were in some cases, they're going to have to reset. They lost their number 2 publisher. So they're going to have to reset those numbers. If they keep the same threshold, just expect all the comic stores to make up the missing DC comics by volume. That's insane. So it'll be curious to see where it all goes. I will say I hope that people take a breath and look at what's really going on here. There's a lot of knee-jerk reactions that get made by fans all the time, and when you see those also being made by creators, publishers, distributors, that's where things get a little crazy. And if this pushes people to make bad decisions, then we're in for a bumpy ride, and this will be a bad thing. But we will see. The answer is not to double down on bad systems. And I think if retailers or anybody else in their heads think that, okay, the response to DC doing this is to double down and do more with Marvel's, variant incentive programs and other things like that, they're going to be driving themselves out of business. And that would be a huge, huge mistake. But we'll see. We'll see where it all goes. Let me know your questions in the comments below. I'm going to answer them over the course of the next week. I will try and keep everybody up to date on the real news and what's going on here. And, follow, subscribe, please, if you're new to the channel. We'll appreciate that. You can follow me on Twitter or Facebook at Comic Perch. Thanks for listening.